afternoon, everyone. I formally declare open this Submissions Committee meeting of the Colac Otway Shire Council on the 13th of April 2022. Almighty God, we seek your blessing and guidance in our deliberations on behalf of the people of the Colac Otway Shire. Enable this council's decisions to be those that contribute to the true welfare and betterment of our community. Okay, can I ask that council staff record all those present today? I'll note that I have received a request for a leave of absence from Councillor Margwhite and Councillor McCracken.
I'm happy to move that we grant those, Mayor.
Okay, do I have a seconder? Councillor Potter, is it to be opposed? All those in favour? The item's carried 5-0. I would like to start this afternoon by acknowledging the traditional custodians and lawmakers of this land, their elders past and present, and welcome any descendants here today. I would like to advise that this Submissions Committee meeting is audio recorded and live streamed with the exception of confidential matters. This includes the public participation sections of meetings. The live stream recording of this afternoon's meeting will be placed on the website as soon as practical. Please note that it is an offence to make an unauthorised recording of this meeting. The purpose of this Submissions Committee meeting is for the hearing of submissions for the Councillor Code of Conduct, the Governance Rules and Public Transparency Policy, considerations of submissions, and the 2022-25 Rating Strategy, consideration of submissions. Are there any declarations of interest, please? There's none. I propose that we move to confirm the minutes from the Submissions Committee meeting held on the 1st of September 2021. Do I have a mover? Councillor Potter. Do I have a seconder? Councillor Costin. Is it to be opposed? I'll now call for a vote. All those in favour? The item's carried 5-0. Okay, Council has received 4 requests to be heard for 3 items this afternoon. A limit of 5 minutes applies for each person who has requested to be heard. So for the Councillor Code of Conduct, so consideration of submissions, we have a submission from Mr Prabhakati. For the Governance Rules and Public Transparency Policy, considerations of submissions, Mr Prabhakati has requested to be heard. And for the 2022-25 Rating Strategy, considerations of submissions, Mr James Judd has requested to be heard. Okay, now we move to item 8.1, Councillor Code of Conduct, consideration of submissions. The purpose of this report is to hear verbal submissions in relation to the Councillor Code of Conduct. Mr Prabhakati has requested to be heard. Mr Cuddy, I think you're online. You have 5 minutes to speak to this item. Go ahead.
May I please request, because I'm speaking from Norfolk Island at a very expensive rate, so what I would request is, if I may, as I understand it, that I have 5 minutes for each of the submissions. I was wondering if I may actually address my 3 submissions in one hit. So I'm not delayed unduly and have a big bill at the end. And I'm happy to address anything after that if you want me to.
Okay.
Is that okay by you?
Yes, yes, I think we can accommodate that. I know you're away.
Okay,
so
thank you very much for that.
Yep.
Yeah. So what I would like to do, you would have noticed that most of my submissions focus on empowering the community participate more fully in matters of importance to them and their shire. So the reason I'm using this collectively is to try and put this in a broader context within which they have been made, and namely that the community's dissatisfaction with their democracy. And just bear with me, I will bring it all together to show how it relates to the submissions that I have made. Now, to just address the dissatisfaction part of it, there has been a report by ANU that showed that only 40% of citizens have trust in their democracy. And the more recent report by Next 25, an independent research group, had found that in relation to the question, do politicians and public servants serve in the best interest of the community, only 21% said that politicians do, and for public servants that was 26%. Now, I don't believe that this is because of poor politicians or public servants, but more because of a governing system that I believe is ill-suited to meet the challenges of our rapidly changing social, political, and technological environment that we live in. To bring all of this in context to the issues of my submissions, I would like to just illustrate this by placing the councillors in the role as citizens in relation to the federal government, for instance. So if you look at it over there, the unedifying yelling and the passes off as debate and the revolving door prime ministership have long frustrated Australians, and I'm sure yourselves as well. Yet it continues because the system permits it. To anyone interested in a system that ensures our leaders work together productively in the nation's interest, the creation of a position called leader of the opposition is, to put it mildly, completely insane. Yet it continues. And both the issues that I quoted can be illustrated through changes which are not difficult to make and with the correct checks and balances in place. Now, I would relate this to council and in talking about systems and processes that do not serve the community's best interests. I'd like to go to the climate petition, not because the climate petition is the main point of interest here. It is in relation to democratic processes and how the community has practically no role in it beyond going to vote, I think. So if we take that climate petition into consideration, the first stage of it was, if you look at the system of how to get a petition going, it is extremely difficult. Now, I'm aware, of course, that Council is now looking into that about electronic petitions, but I wanted to just state how a system could actually make it difficult. And I was, the organizer had asked me to sign some, get involved and just collect some signatures, and I can tell you it is really, really hard to do. So despite that, they were able to get almost 4,000 votes, I believe, and that's almost 20% of the voting public, I would say. And to put it in context for councillors, I think that number of votes was more votes than most councillors got as their primary vote in the council elections. That put them in a position to make decisions. So, and the respect that they deserve accordingly. So equally, I believe that the community themselves should also have systems in place that best serve them and that have some respect for them and one that they can relate to. Then going to the next stages of the petition where there was inordinate delays in processing it, and of course at the end to have a motion that totally ignored the needs of what the petitioners had put forward, is again an instance where the system has been allows that to happen. And finally, of course, in the stage after that, when the public asks questions at the next meeting about, did you take into consideration the council officer's report? And of course, the councillors don't respond. It is a council officer who responds, and it seems to me, at least in my mind at that time, that it was almost like the council staff member is the first line of defense to protect the councillors from the public. Now, I'm not the only one who thinks this way. I've spoken to others someone who approached me last week who was telling me, in council, they are so defensive. It's like, they think that we're attacking them. Believe me, we wish the best for councillors, and we do want the system to work well. But all these examples I give to you as examples that the reason why this dissatisfaction is there from the public is because these systems are in place, which allows people to do things that would not be in the best interest or of the community. But I think on the bright side, it is possible for this to change. And from what I've seen so far of the council in relation to the petition, electronic petitions, and also in relation to the community having a say in councillors' code of conduct, I think that's a good part in it. And that's what makes me, I suppose, more hopeful when I present these submissions, and also the one in relation to the concept at the end about the SMS concept, where the public can take part in the council decision making, because I believe that the times have changed and our system is not keeping up with it. People now expect a greater say in their democracy, and if there's one way that the council can take it is to actually channel that interest in a constructive way, because if you don't do that, I think we will see what happens at the Capitol Hill in America, and of course over here in the Shrine of Remembrance as well, the protests that happened over there. And if you were to go into to any website, you would see that there are lots, and to the internet, there's lots of websites where people want changes in their democracy. So I believe that in local government as well needs to move, and in fact it's the most appropriate one, being the closest to the community, to move in that direction of having the community participate and be empowered. So my challenge, I suppose, in a way that I'm putting forward to the council, and that I'm asking council to pursue, is innovation in our systems and democracy, and in fact to be the leaders in showing a different way in which governance can be done, or to put it in a nutshell, excellence in governance. And the system that I would see is actually what I would call collaborative democracy between councillors, council officers, and of course the community working together in the best interests of the Shire. So I won't go into any intricate detail about what's there in the individual examples that I've given. I know that you already have read those. The one bit that I did want to make, because I actually read a report by the local government inspectorate, I think it was 2021, where they have indicated that they are one of the places where they get lots of queries from local government is in complaints and breach of code of conduct. They waste a lot of resources in this, and they have in fact highlighted that these should actually be dealt with at the council level itself, which perhaps highlights what I was saying in relation to the code of conduct, where I said that to make it more, shall I say, less daunting for the citizen to face up to actually take a matter forward in relation to breaches of code of conduct. And this can be done by ensuring that it is an arbitration or mediation within the local government, because the fact is the local government inspectorate doesn't want to see it, and we are only wasting their time. So that's the only other thing I wanted to add at the end, but you have seen my submission, and I have spoken to various councillors as well, so apologies for any repetition in this statement of mine. And unless someone has a question, I'm happy to finish up.
Thank you, Mr Cutty. Are there any questions for Mr Cutty from councillors? Councillor Hart.
Thanks, Mayor, and thanks, Mr Cuddy. It's Councillor Stephen Hart speaking, just in case I'm not sure if you can see us.
Yeah, I can hear you now.
Okay. In the agenda, today's agenda, have you seen the officer responses to your various suggestions, particularly in relation to the Code of Conduct? Have you had a chance to see those?
No, since I've been here, I haven't actually had a look at that.
Okay. One of your...
I left a few days, yeah.
One of your suggestions was that the code includes an action that whenever the code is reviewed, that there's discussion or engagement with the community. Would you like to elaborate on what you see the advantages of being able to comment on a councillor code of conduct document? Sure.
There are two aspects. I mean, like the last time when I first raised this, the then CEO, when I asked why is it that we didn't get a chance, said, well, because it's not in the rules. Now, to me, if we are looking at the issue of acting in the best interests of the community, look at it this way. The rules are there, the legal, it is true that legally the Act does not say that the community should be consulted for the code of conduct. By the same token, it doesn't either say that either. And I think this is part of the, the new principles-based Act, I believe. But if you will have these two options, you can either include or not include. And if you were to look at it in the best interest of the community, of course you would ask the community. It is very likely that the members of the community for the next 10 years may not comment on it. The reason I commented on it is because I actually experienced something in relation to that, so I could relate to it. And because I was a public servant before, and I know about how people outside of the system are daunted by the system, because I used to work at the courts. So I think the processes like what the AAT had would be really good to make it easier for them to participate in this. So I think where it is good is that it not only gives the community a chance to say what what kind of leaders they're. In fact, that could be another way of looking at it. What the people are saying is, this is the kind of thing that I would expect of my leader. So why shouldn't they have a say at it? So the other aspect of it is the framework on which you built the code of conduct was actually prepared not only by some of the bureaucrats, but in consultation with council staff. So here we have a situation where the bureaucrats have a say, the council staff has a say, the councils have a say, as they should, but not the people that they actually represent. So I think if we're talking about democracy, let us start putting the demo back into democracy, and that is the people being involved. It doesn't matter that people may not have anything to say. I think the next comment you might get is if someone else goes through the experience of trying to do something in relation to the code, and they might see something that I didn't see, and they might, put it forward. It is very likely that that's what would happen. But I've done only to the extent that I saw that there were faults within the system. And of course, the other thing is, and we come into this in relation to accountability, the other aspect I think, which I have not addressed, but you would need to consider is, how do you ensure that this is actually taken seriously? From my experience in the public service, code of conduct always seems to be very important in relation to the people down there working. Somehow the people at the senior level, the same level of accountability does not seem to be there, or it's ignored or overlooked, unless it's taken up by the press, and then suddenly it becomes a bit more serious, or someone complains. So that's the way I see that.
Thank you, Mr. Cutty. Councillors, are there any more questions? No, thank you. Thank you very much, Mr. Cutty.
Thank you so much for listening to me from here in Norfolk. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Thanks very much. Have a good holiday. Do councillors have any questions of officers?
Is now exiting.
Well, Councillor Hart.
Yes, Mayor, my question relates to the recommendation, and if councillors are of a mind to include some part of the submission in the code of conduct, or Mr. Cuddy also spoke about the governance rules, so I'm taking it that we're sort of dealing with both items at once.
We're still on item 8.1, the code of conduct, and then we'll... Yeah,
that's okay. So my question is, where do councillors have the opportunity to mould the code of conduct and or governance rules as a result of these submissions, or do we just sort of rubber stamp this resolution today and slug it out in an open council meeting in a couple of weeks' time?
Thank you, Councillor, through you, Mayor. This is a submissions committee meeting, so it could be you could make a recommendation to council if you wanted to change something about the councillor code of conduct or the governance rules, or alternatively, if you wanted to work on a motion that is different to the recommendation that will be put forward by officers, happy to help you work through that as well.
When you're ready, I'll throw up an alternative on the code of conduct. Thanks, Mayor.
Okay, are there any further questions? Okay, Councillor Hart, you had a motion.
Here goes. I'm more or less happy with the 4 points, on page 6, but I would like to recommend that we have brought to us a code of conduct that incorporates a clause that allows community consultation when the code of conduct's reviewed, subject always to meeting necessary legislative requirements.
Have you got a question, Councillor Potter?
No, Mayor, I think I would second that. I'm just wondering, while I'm talking, Mayor, whether we can't, so we took a submission to both items, whether we couldn't just have just the one motion in relation to both items, or it might be too complicated now with an alternative.
We would just leave it as the one item. Marlo.
Thank you, Mayor. Could I just make a suggestion that we put that the submissions committee recommend council incorporates, because this is an advisory committee.
Yeah, happy for the fine tuning of the words. Thanks, Mayor. Thank you, Marlon.
Sorry, through the Mayor. So the point of clarification there was that it's actually not the committee's role to determine the content or process of the code of conduct. The committee is hearing submissions and is advisory to council. So the committee can resolve to recommend to council how it may then consider the code of conduct. That's the clarification. It's just purely about the role of this committee meeting.
Is there a seconder for Councillor Hart's motion? Oh, I think Councillor Costin jumped in first. Oh, then you can be the seconder, that's fine. Is it to be opposed? Councillor Hart.
Thanks, Mayor, and thanks, Mr. Cuddy, for your submission. The agenda says there was only one submitter, so I think the identity of the submitter has been revealed, despite it not being written in the agenda. I think the key point of difference is I think it's productive and useful to have community comment on the code of conduct, because it is a councillor code of conduct that seeks to regulate councillor behaviour. But I think the community is entitled to have a say on that. I accept that there's sometimes legislative deadlines that have to be met, and in fact we're here today on this issue because we agreed about a year ago that we had to have a code of conduct. We didn't have time for community consultation, so we'd look at it again in about a year's time. But I take the point of the response to the submission from the officers that it's not required. That's fine. This is just going a bit further. May have other issues to raise on the day, which I'll probably have to think about, but I think this one is so clear and easy to incorporate in a code of conduct that we could recommend that, so it could be drafted when it comes to council, subject to this resolution being passed.
Councillor Potter.
Thanks, Mayor. I'll talk about this at the next meeting.
Does any other councillor wish to speak? Councillors, I'll now call for a vote. All those in favour? The item's carried 5-0. Okay, now we heard the submission for item 8.2, which for the governance rules and the public transparency policy. Do councillors have any questions of officers regarding item 8.2? No? Okay, councillors, there's a recommendation up on the screen. Councillor Potter.
Happy to move the recommendation as a motion, Mayor.
Okay, Councillor Potter will move the recommendation as the motion. Is it to be seconded? Is there a seconder? Councillor Bell. Is it to be opposed? No. Councillor Potter. No. Councillor Bell. Does any other councillor wish to speak? Councillor Hart.
Thanks, Mayor. I will support this recommendation that it goes to council, and the only reason I haven't suggested an alternative is that the particular point of concern that I already have with the governance rules was not raised by the submitter. But I will indulge myself for a moment and say that I think the sense of restricting councillors on rescission motions to having to lodge one with 48 hours is going to be something that I'll be bringing up and arguing about vigorously. And in one sense, it is consistent with the submitter's point about community participation and community influence and what council does. And sometimes that has to be done through councillors. Ultimately, councillors are representative of the community. We're not salesmen for council, although when you can do both of those things at the same time, that's great. It's not always the case. And so I'm going to have a lot to say about this attempt to fetter councillors' ability to lodge a rescission motion. I'll have a lot to say about that when the document comes to council in a couple of weeks' time.
Does any other councillor wish to speak? Councillors, I'll now call for a vote. All those in favour, the item's carried 5-0. Okay, now we move to item 8.3, the 2022-25 rating strategy, consideration of submissions. The purpose of this report is to receive and consider submissions received in response to the public exhibition of the draft 2022-25 rating strategy. I'll now call on Mr. Judd. You have 5 minutes to make your submission.
James Judd, Colac. Should the assumption used by the council officers in setting the 2021-22 farm rate become void before the end of the 2022-25 rating strategy, will councils introduce the already promised reduction in the farm rate to 73% that was supposed to commence at the start of the 2021-22 rating year? While farms may only be a small percentage of this entire Shire's population, they contribute a very large portion of this Shire's rate revenue, plus a big portion of the Shire's total value of production.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Judd. Are there any questions for Mr. Judd?
Well, the other item I had a query on, I noticed has been, the officers have said, well, it is not to be considered at this matter, at the rating strategy, so I'll try it from another angle at another meeting.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Judd.
Thank you.
Are there any questions for Mr. Judd? Councillor Hart.
Thanks, Mayor. Just a bit puzzled about what that last item that Mr. Judd appeared to have something else he wanted to say and felt that he wasn't allowed to say it. I wonder if he hasn't taken his full 5 minutes. I wonder if we can at least invite him to just touch on what that issue is and if it's relevant today or not. I don't think there'll be any harm in.
Mr. Judd, did you have anything further to say on the rating strategy? Or
before the 2021-22 rates were struck, the council had authorised a reduction in the farm rate to commence at the beginning of that year. But
Okay.
the COVID-19 was used as the reason for deferring it.
Okay. All right, thank you. Are there any, thank you very much, Mr Judd, for your submission. Are there any questions for officers? No, there's no questions for officers. Councillors, the officers have provided a recommendation with the report for our consideration. Does any councillor wish to move a motion in relation to this matter? Does anyone want to move the motion? A motion? Councillor Bell. So you'll move the recommendation as the motion? Okay. Councillor Potter is the seconder. Is it to be opposed? No. Councillor Bell. No. Councillor Potter, no. Does any other councillor wish to speak? Councillor Costin and Councillor Hart.
Excuse me. Thank you, Mayor. I'd like to thank all the submitters for putting their points forward, and I note that there's quite a few submissions from the coastal areas, which we will need to examine more closely when we come to consider the rating strategy at a council meeting. Thank you.
Councillor Hart.
Yeah, thanks, Mayor. I'd like to thank the people who've written submissions in, and particularly thank Mr Judd for his verbal submission today. And as was mentioned by Councillor Costin, we'll consider this matter in a couple of weeks' time.
Thank you. Does any other... well, no, that's it. Councillors, I'll now call for a vote. All those in favour? The item's carried 5-0. Thank you, councillors, and thank you to our submitters. That concludes this submissions committee meeting of the Colac-Otway Shire. I declare this meeting closed. Thank you. Thanks, Mr Judd.